Again, my name is Tristan Herman. I work in product development. I'm one of the leaders of the product development team here in the R&D group. And Aaron is one of our research agronomists. And it is a privilege to share the stage together. So I'm going to start us off with a quote from John Steinbeck. He said that the land is more than its crops. It holds the stories of the past. And for those of you who have been farming and it's been passed down through multiple generations, you know that this is true. The farms that we farm, especially a piece of dirt that's passed through those generations, it holds stories and it almost develops its own personality. And it's funny, when I go to church and talk to some of the old farmers, or I think about my grandfather, or you meet them at the coffee shop, the old farmers, they talk about certain pieces of dirt like they talk about their wives. They say things like, "Oh, that Kelly farm, it's all right if it's in drought, but don't give her too much water. She is not kind to you if you give her too much water." If you can't say amen, you got to say ouch to that, right? I mean, we know that this is true. And when we released our SymphonyVision camera platform a number of years ago, this gave us another way to tell stories of our farms. Now, the main job of the SymphonyVision camera platform is to use a highly engineered camera with an AI model inside of it to identify crops and the weeds in the fields, categorize them, and then target apply herbicides to those weedy areas of the field. But these cameras give us something else. Again, the way to tell more stories of our farms. And that comes through the weed map. And what we're showing here is a weed severity map. And we're going to see a number of these in this presentation. A weed severity map is a way to combine the number of weeds and size of weeds into one metric. And so if you are going through your fields and you see small weeds, but there's a lot of them in that area, that's a problem. And if you even see just a few weeds, but they're large, that's also a problem. So we combine that together into this map, and when we see green, this is where the cameras have not seen any weeds. It's clean. And then we scale all the way up to red. This is high severity. These are the areas that are highly at risk for the weeds breaking through the canopy and going to seed, dropping on the ground, blowing to other parts of the field, and creating problems in the future. So, what are these weed maps telling us? What are the stories that they're unveiling? Well, if we pull up the same field and we look at the 2024 pre-emerge pass, that weed map, compare it to that same pass in 25, it's pretty obvious that the hot zones in the field are all in the same spot. And this makes sense. You know, this is likely because weeds at some point broke through the canopy, dropped on the ground, and built up the weed bank in those areas of the field. And these are just the sins of the past that are giving to us every year. It's the gift that keeps on giving. Now, we look at a lot of these weed maps in R&D, and we almost see, and on almost every field, we see some other hot spots. And that's around the outside boundaries of our fields. We almost always see streaks of red around our field edges. And this is something that you already know because you're living it. When you drive down the road and you see your road ditches or you're out in your waterways, you see that the weeds and the grass, they are pushing. They are pushing and pushing into your fields, and they want to encroach into those fields. And there's less crop cover to shade that out and push back, and so these areas are highly at risk for going to seed and pushing further into the field. We also have the issue where you may farm right up against a neighbor, and you practice good weed management techniques, but your neighbor doesn't. Well, that doesn't actually matter. His problem quickly becomes your problem. Within R&D, we like to quantify things. We want to put numbers to this. We know that this is a problem, but how big of a problem? So what we did was we looked at 80 different fields across our SymphonyVision camera growers. And we used the lasso tool in Panorama to draw a 30-foot boundary around each field edge. And then we can compare the weed severity in that outside 30 feet with the rest of the field and see what our field edges are doing to us. And what we found was not surprising, but the scale is somewhat alarming. we found that on average, the weed severity, the high weed severity areas are 3 times more in those outside 30 feet. This is a problem. When we're out scouting, when we're out spraying, I find myself asking a lot of times, where are all these weeds coming from? Where are all these weeds coming from? And this is a huge source. This is a huge source of weeds going to seed, blowing further and further into the field. So we know it's a problem. We've identified it's a big problem. What do? Well, the industry has given us a fence row nozzle. A traditional fence row nozzle has been a part of the industry for many years now. And a traditional fence row nozzle simply takes whatever's in the main tank of the sprayer and puts it at a high rate out on our field edges. Now, I ride with a lot of different sprayer operators on a lot of different operations on many brands of sprayers. And I see a lot of these fence row nozzles standard install from the factory. But to be honest, I rarely see them used. So why is this? Well, it's for this reason right here. You know, our weed resistance issues are becoming such a problem, and our tank mixes have become so complex to combat those weed resistance issues. So we're almost always spraying some sort of non-selective herbicide from the main tank. So if we put that out on our field edges through a traditional fence row nozzle, it's going to burn the grass edge. It'll also kill the broadleaves for the moment, but I've just ruined my ground cover for future passes. So this isn't getting the job done. What else can we do? Well, we can hand spray. We can load up the four-wheeler or the side-by-side with a selective herbicide mix like a 2,4-D, and we can go out and hand spray our field edges multiple times per year, every field multiple times. Now, I talk to farmers who do this, and they all say the same thing. It's slow. It is really, really slow to drive to every field multiple times per year and to spray those field edges. There's also another problem with this approach. You know, for our farm at home, where I farm with my dad and my brother, the Santa Fe Railroad line cuts right through our home farm. We farm on both sides of it. And once the crop is up, we can't access that area to treat those field edges. For those of you that have power lines running through your fields, you have the same issue. Once the crop is emerged, the side-by-side doesn't get to that area to treat, and it becomes a hotbed for a weed infestation. So we're left with this classic dilemma. A dilemma is when you have a situation and that you want to resolve. There's multiple options, but they all have downsides. We can do nothing, and the weeds will push in towards our field edges. We can use a traditional fence row nozzle, but we'll burn our grass edges. Or we can hand spray, but it's slow, and we can't get everywhere we need to get. So we looked at this and said, there's got to be a better way. There has to be a way to treat our field edges without sacrificing and taking these undesirable downsides. And we think we found it with a new product that we're calling SmokeRow. Now, we've always wanted to do that at Winter Conference, but we have never had a product with a name quite like SmokeRow to make it happen. So we're happy we could bring that in. So with an introduction like that, you might think this is what SmokeRow looks like. Now, let's just agree amongst friends. Let's just say that's AI. Let's just say that's not real. No, SmokeRow, it may not be quite as flashy as a flamethrower, but it is equally as effective. SmokeRow controls end-of-boom nozzles, spraying out a secondary tank mix on our field edges that is safe for the grass. We do this by loading that mix through a secondary tank on the sprayer. Now, a lot of sprayers already have these extra tanks on them. It can be an unused foamer tank that came installed, but now that you're spraying with GPS, you're not using it. Or it can be a leftover injection tank. Or if this doesn't exist on your sprayer, we can add one for you. So again, we're pulling from that secondary tank through our SmokeRow pump kit. This is a well-packaged pump kit where we have an integrated filter, bypass valves, and solenoid valves that you can control from the cab with some simple switches and a foot pedal. So again, the SmokeRow control is just some simple switches, optional foot pedal. This product does not require a 20/20 to run. So this can go on each and every sprayer that sits in your shed today. So I'm going to go ahead and fire up our demo stand, and you'll see how it works. So the great thing about using SmokeRow is we're already in the field. We're already spraying. So it's a perfect time to treat our field edges. So I'm going to turn on my Symphony nozzles, and you can see they're spraying in yellow here. This is the mix that would not be safe to spray on my grass edges. I'll go ahead and from the cab, switch on my SmokeRow pump, and I can either spray a short-range nozzle, I can spray a long-range nozzle, or I can spray both, depending on the amount and the distance I want to be spraying. And you can see we've colored it in green because we know this is a different product because we're pulling from a different tank on the sprayer. A product that is safe for our grass edges, that will kill the broadleaves and keep those issues at bay. So I'm going to go ahead and shut things off. So SmokeRow is commercially available right now from your Precision Planting dealer. So I hope you get a chance to connect with your dealer about how SmokeRow can help you treat field edges and take care of one of the primary issues of weeds in our fields. Aaron Herman had a chance to run SmokeRow in its beta form this past year, so I'm going to bring him up to the stage and he can share his experience. So if the black sheep of the family will go ahead and come up, we'll hand things off.
After an introduction like that, I feel like we need to talk about family dynamics in a farming operation, right? But we'll stick with something a lot less complicated, something like managing field edges. So I had the opportunity to run SmokeRow this spring. Unfortunately, it was not the flamethrower version. But one of the fields I used it on was this Terhune field. And you'll see we have some classic weed pressure coming in from the neighbor on the south in this field along the end rows. And as we pan over that angled end row, that's actually against a railroad track. And we can see weed pressure coming in from there as well. And then you'll see as I went around this tower line, we have weed pressure coming in from the tower line as well. But take special note as we go out past the end rows, this field's actually relatively clean. And so I was pretty excited to use SmokeRow to start knocking back some of these issues along the field edge. This is a video taken from the field as I'm going around that power line. And as you can see, I probably should have thrown a little brush killer in with the 2,4-D, but I was still excited to keep this area from being a giant ragweed in a water hemp hotbed. Now, as I was going along the railroad tracks, I decided I want to see how big a difference does SmokeRow really make. So before I got to this tree, I actually kept SmokeRow off. And then when I hit the tree, I didn't actually hit the tree. I don't hit things with my sprayer booms, and I'm sure you don't either. But when I got to the tree, I turned SmokeRow on, and you can see in just one pass of SmokeRow how big a difference that made along that railroad track. Well, if we take a little different angle, same spot here, you'll notice where we didn't have SmokeRow on, those weeds are already encroaching into the first row of corn. So we're producing seed, some of that seed's even going to get sucked into the combine, and that's why we've been seeing this issue along those end rows year after year after year. So I used SmokeRow on this field. I got back to the office, and I told the guys after the first day using it, I said, this is the most fun I've had in a spray in a long time. Because I've managed a lot of field edges manually, and trust me, this is a much, much better time to do it in the spray pass. But maybe you're sitting here and you've never managed field edges before. Well, I encourage you, SmokeRow is a great, easy way to get started managing one of your biggest sources of weed seed. So from weed maps, we've learned that field edges are a problem, but what else have we learned? Well, we've looked at hundreds and hundreds of weed maps in R&D, and what's really interesting, as you look at more and more, there's recurring themes. There's things that just keep coming up on different farms, different fields. And we want to share some of those with you today, so as weed managers trying to get a handle on weed control, you know what the problem areas are and the things you can do to manage them. One of our primary concerns is weed escapes at the end of the season. This map here is taken from a soybean fungicide pass. So we've already had our herbicide passes done, and so any weed here is actually not going to get controlled. You'll notice some small yellow flecks. Those are really small weeds below the canopy of the soybeans that are going to get shaded out. I'm not too worried about those, but you can see we have some serious weed escapes brewing out here. Well, why is that? Let's dig in a little bit more. So I'm going to split the screen with a Smart Firmer OM map from the planter pass, and as we look at this, I'm going to pull up the crosshairs with shift, and you'll notice those high OM areas line up perfectly with those weed escapes. Why is that? Well, that's because in this field, those high OM areas are low-lying ground. We got a rain 10 days after planting. This field is poorly drained, and we lost stand in those areas. And so now we don't have a good canopy, and we have higher weed pressure there. This is actually something I see a lot. And we rarely think of tile and drainage as a method of weed management, but it really is. Because if we don't keep a good canopy, we're not going to have good weed control at the end of the season. Another thing I see is sometimes we're pushing those planting conditions. We're going when it's mostly fit, which really means there's parts of the fields that are flat out not fit. And we get a poor stand in those areas, and then we come back and we can actually see that in the weed map, weeds in those areas. Let's look at another example. This is an example from a farm that had been sprayed with a traditional rate controller sprayer in the past. Now you'll notice we can see the classic weed pressure from the outside. Again, almost every map shows that. But we're going to zoom in on the two highest weed severity areas in this field. What is causing this? Well, a traditional rate controller sprayer, as it goes around a turn, it does not have nozzle by nozzle flow adjustment. And so the outside of the boom is traveling faster, and it actually puts on a partial rate of chemical. So if we split the screen, we're going to actually pull up the nozzle speed map, and we're going to see how big a difference there is. So I use shift to get my crosshairs, and we're going to look at the outside of the boom, which is about 10, 11 mile an hour. You go into the middle of the boom, it's about 6, 7 mile an hour, and then on the outside and the inside, 3, 4 mile an hour. So you can see we're taking a 30, 40% rate reduction on that outside of the boom because that rate controller is actually controlling to that 6, 7 mile an hour. Now, if we go to the lasso feature, we can see the difference. We have 9% weed density when we're going along the field edge going straight. We go around that turn, we have 34% weed density. That's 3x the area of weeds in that area because of that issue. You go out in the middle of the field, 0.1%. Farmer's doing a terrific job out in the middle of the field. And so managing field edges, managing the sprayer performance is one of the reasons we think Symphony nozzle is just a foundational technology, because it makes sure that we get the right rate on every single acre. And on top of that, it manages our droplet size across a wide speed range and gives us individual nozzle swath control. Now, we've also ran into scenarios that we would have never even guessed, and we couldn't have even made them up. Early this spring, one of our engineers, Jason, stopped by my desk, and he said, "Aaron, there is grass everywhere in my field." And I said, "What? We've never had grass problems in your field." He's like, "Yeah, I know. I have no clue what's going on." So anyways, my curiosity had me, so I stopped by his field on the way home, and sure enough, there's grass everywhere. Well, we were baffled, but we decided we just had to load up a stiff rate of Roundup and go burn this field down. And this is a video taken from the cab while we're burning the field down, and you can see in the background there is grass everywhere. You'll notice also on the 2020 we're mapping high weed severity on the left, and we're mapping the weed type, which is yellow. That's grass on the right. But as we're going through the field, I noticed that there was areas of the field that didn't have grass. And in some of the transitions from grass to no grass, it was in a straight line. And I told Jason, I'm like, I don't know what happened, but it has to be man-made. Weeds don't naturally grow in straight lines. And so we just kept thinking, and finally at the end of the field, we pulled up the weed map. And this is a weed type map. All the areas of yellow and orange have grass in them. And I don't know what your first reaction is, but my first reaction is that looks awfully like grit. And so I asked Jason, I'm like, did you spread anything last fall? And initially he thought he did all liquid, but as he stared at this map more and more, he realized and remembered that he did variable rate potash on this field, making it obvious that there was ryegrass that contaminated that spreader. So you can view it as a mistake or a free cover crop, whichever one you want, but it was a very interesting learning. So I'm convinced that there's things on your farm, I hope this isn't one of them, that you'll find. You'll find your problem areas. You'll find things that you thought worked that didn't. And you might find places you need to be scouting a lot better. But these maps are extremely powerful in learning. Also, we learned that spinner spreaders don't do that great of a job. This is a weed density map. As you can see, this is the density of that grass. You can see the transitions in and out of these zones are pretty poor. You can even see where that spinner spreader decided to unload the extra fertilizer on the south part of the field. And I just sure hope my soil sample points are not in that strip, right? So take note of the nutrient management sessions today, because there are a lot better ways to be applying fertilizer than with spinner spreaders. Now, sometimes when we have a weed issue, it's not this big of one. It's a smaller one, maybe along a field edge, a wet hole. How big a deal is that if it's just a small area of the field? This map comes from one of our SymphonyVision rate growers from this spring. The grower told me that last year they had a weed escape in the south part of this field because the landlord wanted to pull out one of the Liberty passes. Now, this is the map from this year, and you can see exactly where that weed escape was. But it gets even more interesting. If we zoom in on this weed escape, we're going to split the screen with the angle of the combine harvest. And I'm going to pull up the crosshairs again, and we're going to follow 3 passes north out of the weed escape. 1, 2, 3. All of those are heading north. I'm going to track that middle one, and you'll see that the combine drug seed north out of the weed escape. You can see it turn around on the middle end row and head south. And so we have a weed escape in a small area, and then our combines come along, and they drag that weed seed hundreds of feet one way, hundreds of feet the other way, spreading out our problem. And this is why we believe that it's so important that we manage these top factors that impact weed severity, no matter how small the size is. I like this list because some of them are relatively simple. Managing field edges, walking out with a backpack sprayer to clean up a weed escape, we can do that. The other reason I like this list is a lot of them you can do if you don't own your own sprayer. And there's many of you that don't own your own sprayer, this is your to-do list. Because the data's in that managing these things can have a direct impact on your weed control and your weed pressure. Now, one of the things I didn't include in this list is chemical programs, which is kind of interesting because I get guys asking me a lot. They know I do side-by-side trials. They'll ask me what rate I think a product should be at. They'll ask me whether I think they need enlist in with their Liberty or can they go Liberty only. They'll ask me what residuals I'm using, what I like, what I don't like. And so I know as farmers, we're constantly wrestling with how do we get a chemical program that has really good weed control with spending as little money as possible. But I'm convinced that the problem is much bigger than that. It's much bigger than your ability to choose the right program. And let me explain that. You're going to have to bear with me on this graph, but this is a really neat data set. I compiled 5,000 spray acres from our operation as well as several other SymphonyVision grower operations. I have it broken down by field on the bottom, and then you can see I have it categorized into pre-passes, first post, corn and soybeans, and second post, that's mostly soybeans. And then the height of those bars is the percent area of the field of each of those weed severities. So the high weed severity, the red, the height of that bar is a percent area of a big weed or lots of small weeds. We have medium weed severity, the orange, the low weed severity, the yellow, that is sparse small weeds, easy to kill. And then obviously the green is where there's no weeds at all. So you'll see that there's a few fields in here that are really clean. And there's a few fields that have serious problems. We have a field in here that has 75% high weed severity. I was sweating when I was spraying it. But most of these fields have a mix of both. So when we choose a program, how do we choose a program? If we choose a program that has the full rate of products, that has the modes of action we need for the high weed severity, we're going to be overspending in all of the areas where there's low weed severity or no weeds at all. If we decide to cut back rate a little bit or pull a mode of action out, we might get away with it, but there's all these fields, almost all these fields have some portion that are high weed severity and that we might risk having a weed escape on them. So the problem is not your ability to pick a chemical program. The problem is blanket application. Blanket application is strong-arming you into a one-size-fits-all approach, and as you look at the data, there is no one-size-fits-all. The other problem with blanket application is all these green areas. All these green areas have no weeds and do not need a contact chemical program. If you run the numbers on this, it's about 70% of the acres. So 70% of our contacts are being wasted on areas where there is no weeds. So think about that as you're picking out your contact chemical program for next year. You're actually only picking it out for 30% of your acres, roughly. 70% of them, it won't even matter. So what other questions have we had about blanket application? One of them was, does blanket applying contact chemical hurt yield? We've had this question for a number of years. We have 2 years of side-by-side plots out, and I'm going to summarize some of those results for you here today. First, we'll look at corn. This is corn yield loss to blanket application compared to only spraying when weeds are present. So this isn't blanket versus nothing, blanket versus only spraying when weeds are present. 2024, we took a 2.9 bushel loss from Roundup Liberty and dicamba. In 2025, Roundup Atrazine, Callisto Liberty, we took a 1.6 bushel loss. If we flip over to soybeans, same thing. We're just shy of a bushel in 24 and 25 with Liberty and Enlist soybeans. But we do have a lot of data, a lot of replications behind this, and a really good win rate, and so we really think that there is a ding to blanket application. So really, blanket contact application is costing us every year, whether we like it or not. It's costing us $8 in yield loss per year, but more importantly, in a much bigger dollar amount, it's wasting 70% of our contact chemical. For a lot of operations, this is $40 to $60 the acre wasted. And at Precision Planting, we just can't stand recurring cost in an operation. And that is one of the reasons we're so excited about our product SymphonyVision Spot. Because as it goes through the field, it uses cameras to determine that weed severity in real time. And then it can manage the nozzles and apply the right chemical rate to that weed severity. So if we see high weed severity, a big weed or lots of small weeds, we can give it the full force of your program. If we see a spot of low weed severity, we can back that program off a little bit. And the best part of all is if there's no weeds, we can shut off the appropriate nozzles, saving you money. So let's look at a field example that's a good example of what farmers are seeing with this technology today. This field's called E67. We put down the pre, residual, and contact, and we're coming back in the first post to spot spray. If we had to blanket apply this field, it would cost us $30 the acre for Liberty, Enlist, Volunteer, and an adjuvant based on FBN pricing. But with SymphonyVision Spot, we only have to spend $30 the acre on the areas of high weed severity. We can back off a little bit on the areas of low weed severity, and then we can shut off in all the areas of green where there's no weeds. If we do that, we have $22 the acre in savings. If we do the same thing for the second post, a little bit cheaper pass, we pulled out the Volunteer, but a little more savings because it's a cleaner pass, we had $23 the acre of savings. Add them together, you get $45, plus the $8 the acre yield advantage because we didn't have to blanket apply, and you get total savings of $53 the acre. So there's no question that SymphonyVision Spot is a money-saving tool. But as an agronomist, that's not even my favorite part about SymphonyVision Spot. My favorite part is for $12 an acre, I was able to hit the tough spots with the full rate of Liberty and Enlist twice. Like, that is just incredible from a weed control standpoint. And that's what we find. Guys choosing a chemical program so much easier. Because if you need it, you'll put it in because you're not wasting it on the rest of the field. Also, sometimes the weather turns on us and we have to do a respray, or there's a tough weed we need to go out and get and we want to make an extra pass, but we know it's going to cost way too much if we blanket apply it. SymphonyVision Spot's a great tool, and our growers are using it to actually get better weed control as well as saving money. But the second we get done talking about SymphonyVision Spot, the question always comes up, and it's, what about residuals? And so let's talk about residuals a little bit. How do residuals impact weed severity? What's their value in your system? And we know at Precision Planting that the majority opinion out there are that residuals are an absolute must. But at Precision Planting, we believe that one good measurement is worth 1,000 opinions. And so we're going to go out and we're going to test it ourselves. So in these same plots where we tested yield differences, we also tested residual versus no residual to see their impact and measure it. I'm going to start by giving you a visual. On the left is where we had 2.5 ounces of residual, and on the right is where we took that residual out of the pre, no residual. And this is taken right before the first post pass. So you can see the difference there. Where we don't have residual, we have bigger water hemp, we have more water hemp, we have healthier water hemp. If we flip over to our soybean plot and look at the map, this actually had 5 ounces of residual at planting, and we're coming back mapping in the first post pass, not spraying any residual. So as you can see, we did not have residual on 4 treatments 30 foot wide in this plot. Can you pick them out? Yeah, they're right there. Pretty easy. More area of high weed severity from the lack of that residual. If we flip to the second post pass, you actually still can see the effect of that residual at planting with more areas of low weed severity, while the rest of the plot is much cleaner with areas of no weeds. So I took the data from these maps and compiled them into graphical form so we could look at them. So this would be the first post map, the treatments of no residual. The height of that bar is the percent area of weeds. And then I've got it broken down into low, medium, and high weed severity. So you can see we took the total area of weeds in those treatments of no residual, put on the residual, and we cut them in half. But probably more importantly is look at what high weed severity did. High weed severity went from 40% to 5%. We almost eliminated the areas of high weed severity. If we flip to the second post, you can see the high weed severity areas are gone, but we still reduced the total area of weeds by almost 50%. So there's no question as we look at this, which of these treatments we would rather be managing. We'd be rather managing the treatments that have residual on them. So the value of residuals is this reduced severity for subsequent passes. The reduced severity makes it easier to get complete weed control. We know smaller weeds and fewer weeds are easier to get controlled than a lot of weeds and big weeds. Also, you can buy yourself a little time before the next pass. As you saw in the picture, it looks like about 1 to 2 weeks. The first time I tested this, I was terrified I was going to have to be spraying every single week if I didn't put on a residual. And that's just not the case, but there is an advantage on getting in there for the next pass. It gives you a little bit of time. Also, there's less herbicide resistance to residuals. And if we're preventing them from coming out of the weeds from coming out of the ground, we have less of a chance for the contacts to select for a resistant phenotype. So these are all the reasons residuals are in your programs today. But it gets even better if you combine it with SymphonyVision Spot. Because SymphonyVision Spot, if there's reduced weed severity for subsequent passes, SymphonyVision Spot capitalizes on it. Because it'll actually spray less and save you money on your contact chemical. So in a sense, SymphonyVision Spot almost kind of pays back a little bit for your residuals. So today, our SymphonyVision Spot growers have managed residuals in 2 primary ways. One, they either have a residual-only pass. This is typical for a conventional till grower that already has a residual-only pass. Or they sacrifice spot spraying in one of their passes to be able to blanket apply their contacts and their residuals together. Typically, that's the pre, and then they spot spray their more expensive post passes. But we believe you shouldn't have to sacrifice using spot spray technology on a pass just to be able to blanket apply residual. We also believe you shouldn't be confined to only applying residual in one pass so you can spot spray. We also realize there's a lot of other products that need blanket applied, such as fungicides, insecticides, fertilizers. For crops such as cotton, growth regulators. So the problem is, how do we blanket apply all of these products while still having the opportunity to simultaneously spot spray our weeds in real time on the same pass? Unfortunately, I'm going to have to hand it back to the golden side of the family to solve this problem.
All right. Aaron has just left us with the problem. The problem is we want to be able to broadcast apply and spot apply all within the same pass. And when we have a problem that needs a solution, what's the hero we bring into this story? It's the engineer, the humble engineer. That's the hero, right? I joke. But the job of an engineer, if you take the job of an engineer and you boil it down to its most simple form, the job of an engineer is to design a product to solve a problem. That's what engineers should do, design products to solve problems. But I have to ask you, how many of you have been working on your car, you're working on your tractor, and you are reaching for that filter that you want to change? You are reaching, and you're contorting your body in all kinds of ways to get to that filter, and you can't get it. What's the thing you say? What stupid engineer designed it like this? All right, now for a moment of reflection. I am an engineer. I have a mechanical engineering degree. And even I have to admit that we as engineers sometimes can design things in a way where the solution is worse than the problem we tried to solve. So when we looked at broadcasting and spot applying all within the same pass, we knew we wanted to get it right. So we got together as an engineering team and we said, okay, how are we going to solve this? Well, let's start, what's the most obvious thing we could do? What presents itself quickly? Well, the first thing we could do is we could put 2 nozzles out on the spray boom, one to broadcast apply and one to spot apply. And then we have a tank on the sprayer. Well, we could just split the tank. We could make one part of the tank for a contact mix to spot apply and one part a residual mix to broadcast. And then have 2 separate pumps to deliver that product out to each nozzle. This is essentially 2 sprayers on one chassis. Again, this was the most obvious thing that presented itself to us, but it's been said before that the obvious solution is frequently the wrong one. So let's think about this. Why might this have problems associated with it? Well, first, when I have these two different tanks, I have 2 different tank mixes that need to be managed. I have a spot tank mix and a broadcast tank mix. And now for my tender, I either need to increase my tendering time or I need to chase my sprayer with 2 different tenders, and whoever's running that tender has to manage twice as many things. We've just increased the logistical complexity of the guy running the tender. But maybe even a bigger deal is the fact that I've taken my tank and I've reduced the size. I have cut the capacity of my tank to where I used to be able to spray, let's say, 80 acres. Now I'm spraying 55 acres with a single fill-up. But it's actually even worse than that. When I have this approach and 2 separate tank mixes, one of them will run out before the other, requiring an early trip back to the tender. So let's say I top this system off and I go out to spray. I'm going to spray the outside of the field where there's more weed pressure. I'm going to drain my contact tank before I touch the capacity of the residual tank. So it's an early trip back to the tender. So I fill back up and I go out to spray a less weedy area of the field, the interior. In that situation, I'll drain the residual tank before I've utilized the capacity of the contact. So it's all these extra trips back. But again, we like to quantify things in R&D. So what we did is we looked at those 5,000 spray acres that Aaron mentioned, and we ran the numbers, and we calculated that using this system, it would require 50 extra trips back to the tender. Not total trips, extra trips back to the tender, making our overall spray operation 30% less efficient. And we do not believe a 30% less efficient spray operation is acceptable. I love this quote from Tom Wolfe from Sprayers 101. He says that timing is key in crop protection. A mediocre spray at the right time is far more effective than a great spray applied at the wrong time. And many of you know this. This is the whole reason many of you own your own sprayer today. It's not always about saving the application fee for renting that job out. We know that when the weeds are coming in flush, we have to be on top of it. Timing is key. So we go back to the drawing board as an engineering team and we say, okay, we want to broadcast apply and spot apply at the same time, but we cannot sacrifice efficiency. We think we found the way through a unique way to solve the problem. What we're going to do is we're going to, on this sprayer that we're looking at here, we're going to load anything that needs to be broadcast applied into the main tank, which we're showing in blue. This would be our residual program, but also our fertilizers, fungicides, insecticides, cotton picks. Anything that needs to be broadcast goes in the tank shown in blue. And because I haven't cut the capacity of the tank, I can utilize the full range of that tank size. So then this blue product, this broadcast tank mix, goes out to the main spray boom, goes out to the primary boom, showed in blue. Then we're going to add a second set of nozzles. And this can be done either with a second set of stainless steel plumbing, or many sprayers today have a truss style boom where you can't fit a second set of plumbing. Well, the engineers came up with a way to piggyback a secondary nozzle solenoid right next to the standard Symphony nozzle solenoid. making for a very tight and efficient packaging that can work in even very tight sections of spray booms. So once we have that installed, we're going to bring in a separate tank. And this is where I'm going to load my contact killers. But I'm not going to put it here in a diluted form, in a tank mix form. I'm going to store these contact killers in their raw, concentrated form on the sprayer. And if I want to spray out multiple contact killers, I just add more tanks. We then bring in a chemical mixer, and on the inlet side of that, we Y in the blue solution, that broadcast, that residual solution. We then use a pump to deliver the yellow contact killer in concentrated form into that mixer. Now, if we all passed third grade art class, what happens when we mix the blue and the yellow together? What do we get? Green. That's right, we passed. So now we have a separate solution that contains both the residual and the contact going out to that second set of nozzle bodies. So as we're spraying through the field, when weeds are not present, I'm going to be spraying out of the primary boom, the one that contains the residual mix by itself. But then when the cameras detect weeds, I will switch to the second set of nozzles. I'll turn off the primary and I'll switch to the secondary, and I'll spray the mix of residual with the contact killer over those weeds. And then once the weeds are passed, I'll switch back to my primary boom and spray the residual only. We showed this to one of the farmers that we work with quite a bit. Showed him this concept, and he said, "Tristan, you're thinking like a farmer," which as an engineer is one of the higher compliments you can pay to us when we work here. But this is actually not just a concept. This is the latest commercial offering from Precision Planting in the SymphonyVision lineup. So we're excited to announce today at Winter Conference SymphonyVision Duo. Duo is the ability to broadcast apply our residuals, our fungicides, our fertilizers, while applying our contact killers and saving on those. You know, we believe this is the true pinnacle of spraying, giving us the maximum effectiveness of our residual program while saving money on our contacts. And because Duo does not require a subscription to run, the savings continue to compound. So again, great concept, thinking like a farmer. Let's see it in action. So what we have, similar to the animation you just saw, is our spray track. We use this for testing right in this room in R&D when Winter Conference is not happening. What we have in the same colors that you saw is our main tank. This is where we're going to mix anything that needs to be broadcast. This is where I'm going to put my residuals. In a separate injection tank, I will store my contact killers, again, in their raw, concentrated form. The residual only mix comes out to a T, where on one side of the T, we go out and send it to the primary boom. The other side of the T goes to the inlet of the mixer, where it's met by the contact killer. And when mixed together, we get the residual with the contact added. The ratio of the residual with the contact is maintained by this injection pump. And I want to take just a moment to brag on the engineering team that developed this product, because it's more than simply just a pump. When we think about injecting a product that maybe we want something high rate, 60 ounces an acre, and we're going through the field at 20 miles an hour, we're spraying a high rate at 20 gallons to the acre, this pump can make that rate work. But then there's products like a Stinger that's 4 ounces an acre, and you might be firing just a few nozzles on the boom. You're spraying at 10 mile an hour at 15 gallon to the acre. This pump can hit that rate as well. It's about 1,000 to 1 ratio of ranges that we need to work with, and the engineers that designed the pump and tuned the software on it were able to make that work. So huge hat off to them. So now, going out to my spray boom, I have a mix that contains residual only and a mix that contains the residual with the contact killer. We're going to send it down the spray track with a weed, and we'll see what we got. All right. So now, as we mentioned before, both mixes contain residual, the green and the blue. So everything got residual. We got it everywhere. But the contact killer, because it's mixed into the green, it only got applied to the weed and the buffer around it. So we can see the effectiveness of this approach. But let's go back to the efficiency side. How does using this help us stay efficient? Well, if we pull into the field, we're going to go ahead and load the main tank with anything that needs to be broadcast. And depending on the size of your plumbing, this takes anywhere from 10 to 20 minutes. While that is loading, instead of sending my contact killer into a venturi like I normally would, I'm going to connect it right to an adapter on the pump. And that's going to deliver the product up into an injection tank. Again, many sprayers have these tanks on them, and you can utilize that, or we can add one or many for you. This process of adding the contact killer to an injection tank takes about 5 minutes. And so this was time you were already spending waiting on the main tank to fill, so we haven't wasted any extra time. There's no sacrifice in efficiency. So then we go out to spray. And we're going to show you some video from our beta testing season this past summer. Again, in our 2 booms, we have a residual mix, a residual only mix in blue, and then in green we have the residual with the contact added. Now I want to call out, we have a nozzle splitter on the boom that has residual with contact. This allows us to use a finer droplet size while still getting high flow. Gives us a more favorable droplet pattern for those contact killers. So we're going to go through the field, and we're going to be switching between the primary boom and the secondary boom depending on whether weeds are present. We're not spraying both at the same time. We're switching depending on whether the weeds are there. One thing I love about the way the engineers designed that pump is each and every one of them has a highly accurate flow meter on it. And this gives us the confidence to know that we are always injecting at the right rate. We're always maintaining the exact right ratio that we need to get the contact killer added to the residual. So then we're done. We pull out of the field. We've used everything in the main tank. But we probably have some of that contact killer left over. Well, we can actually use the pump that's doing the injecting to send that right back to the tote that it came from. And so I don't have to go out and predict how many weeds are there, how much product am I going to use. I just load up more than enough. Whatever's left over, I just pump it right back where it came from. I can reclaim all that product, use it on the next field or the next pass. So we can see how Duo really gives us the ability to broadcast apply and spot apply without sacrificing efficiency. And this new technology that we're so excited about to launch here at Winter Conference, it can work on the sprayer that's in your shed right now. And the tender that's servicing your sprayer today can service this equipment with minimal modifications. So we're really excited about what the future looks like with SymphonyVision Duo. As we start wrapping things up, I want to give you a chance to hear from Blake Zier. Blake has been a beta tester for us for a number of different products in the SymphonyVision family. He had a chance to run Duo on his custom spray business this past season.
My name is Blake Zier. I'm running a 2018 SDS-14 Haggy machine. It has Symphony nozzle on it, and then we've added the cameras for spot, and then recently we added the Duo, it's the secondary boom option, so we can spray residuals at the same time on the sprayer as well. Yeah, so Duo allowed us, especially in our operation, we do a lot of non-GMO beans, allowed us to keep our residuals being broadcast at all times, but also pull the contact chemistry out of the main tank and then apply it only where it was needed, allowing the cameras to determine that for us, which was huge. To me, Duo is what takes it to kind of the next level, because in this world of weed management, we've got to be able to keep the residuals going. We can't only rely on contacts forever. We know we're just going to build resistance down the road. So we've got to be putting the residuals down and keeping the weeds at bay from before they ever emerge.
So it's been a pleasure to work with Blake on both this project and a number of products in the sprayer family. So again, that's going to start bringing us to a close. It's super exciting to launch new products. That's really cool as an R&D team to take the things we've been working on and to launch them commercially. But I hope many of you came with your dealer today and And you know, it may not be going all the way to dual boom spot spraying. Just even thinking about how to take your spray operation just that next step. It might be a low-cost, highly efficient tool like SmokeRow, adding that, allowing you to control field edges, a boom recirculation system like Reclaim, or just adding the first couple cameras to your sprayer. I hope you get a chance to talk to your dealer about how you can take that next step in your spray operation. So on behalf of Aaron and myself and the entire PTX employee base, we want to thank you for coming to Winter Conference today. Thank you for coming to this session. We really appreciate it, and we hope you have a safe and productive year.